Happy Tuesday, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door. And, we've been doing pretty well about this starting on time thing. A little later than today we have been. I'll take the L for that one. But I'm glad that you're with us. It's going to be a really fun show today. It's Jeff Sintel coming up. We'll talk a lot of UGA recruiting with him. We'll also preview the Marlowe's matchup at Thursday, Marlowe's in Brookhaven with John Stinchcomb. So we'll do that with you. A lot, as you might imagine, on Georgia-Auburn, including one way in which I think that Georgia can win this game on Saturday, and one way that you might assume that UGA is going to win it that might not be quite as easy to pull off as you might think. I'll explain that. Also, some really interesting things going on around the rest of the SEC right now. So we'll try to touch all those bases over the course of the next few minutes. Just really glad to have you with us. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door. Begins.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So one of the traditions in the SEC when you're getting ready for a big game, and this is probably true in college football all over the place, we just notice it more when it comes to SEC teams because that's who we talk about on a regular basis here, particularly the Georgia Bulldogs. But one of the traditions is the coach speak, right? I mean, we have a tendency to believe, and I think with some evidence, that maybe Kirby Smart and Gus Malzahn, deep down, maybe they don't really like each other very much. They come from different coaching trees. Gus Malzahn famously kind of after the 2017 game in Auburn kind of talked a little trash on the field. Last year, Kirby Smart seemingly went for a fake field goal when that wasn't necessarily something he probably had to do there in that moment. There's just a little bit of sense that these two programs don't like each other very much, or maybe even the two coaches at the helm don't like each other very much, but neither side's going to let on for that when they're speaking to reporters leading up to the game. It's just going to be one, thing of praise heaped on top of the next over and over and over again. Malzahn talks about how brilliant Kirby Smart is as a defensive coach. Kirby Smart talks about how brilliant Gus Malzahn is as an offensive coach and how much respect they have for each other. And that's just kind of the way that it goes. And for the most part, we as fans, and in this case, I'm no different than any of you, we as fans have kind of become conditioned to tune all this out. Coach speak just sort of is what it is. But there was something that Gus Malzahn said this week that while it certainly has the look of being just regular old run-of-the-mill coach speak, I think there's actually a little more depth and substance to it than it might appear. Now, I want you to hear this for yourself, and you can judge for yourself when I'm done if this truly is a substantial factor in the game on Saturday. I believe that it is. Gus Malzahn was asked about the Georgia defense, and he was quite complimentary. But for me, complimentary in such a way that there is actually some meaning that we can pull out of this. Here's Gus Malzahn on Georgia from this week.
They've got a lot of defensive linemen they play. I mean, and when they put other guys in there, there really isn't a drop-off. Real impressed, obviously, with the run defense. I don't think they've given up a rushing touchdown the whole season, which that hadn't happened, the last 20 years in college football. So that tells you a lot. They're solid on the back end, too. They got some guys that can really run. And like I said, I mean, we're playing, one of the more talented teams in the entire country, maybe the most talented, but they're impressive to watch on film.
So listen, I mean, you hear Gus Malzahn speak every week. He's going to say some version of that about every team that he plays. Georgia's not really all that different there in that regard. But the idea that Georgia has a talent edge against Auburn on Saturday, I believe matters. I believe that Georgia does have a talent edge over Auburn, and that's a more of a significant statement than you might realize. Because frankly, and listen, I'm no different than any of you. I've got a Georgia shirt on today. I got my buddy Eddie here on the desk. Now, Eddie's the chief Gator hater, but that doesn't mean we have any less intensity about the Deep South's oldest rivalry. Georgia fans don't like Auburn. I'm right there with you on all of that. However, I must tell to a bunch of Auburn haters who are watching or listening to our program here right now that to a certain extent, from a national standpoint, Auburn's probably a little bit underrated. This is probably a better team that Georgia's going to play on Saturday than maybe some people around the country might realize. And the fact that Georgia goes on the road in this venue, still enough of a talent edge to be the point spread favorite in this game, that's actually a pretty bold statement for the positive about UGA. Let me kind of build on this just a little bit more. Auburn was ranked 11th last week in the college football playoff top 25. They may move up a little bit this week, but let's just kind of work with where we were last week. Auburn at 11th. And that's kind of, sort of outside the top 10, ranked behind Florida, a team that beat Auburn a little earlier in the season. But if you talk to the Vegas folks about that, you get a little bit different answer. The Vegas people, and I always say this, whether you bet on games or not, you should always listen to the opinions from people from Las Vegas or the online betting community, because they have to put their money where their mouth is. If they are wrong, their wallet gets a little lighter. They are forced to put some dollars behind the opinions that they express. And in the Las Vegas top 10s that you may see on the internet, I'll cite one from Todd Furman here, the kind of Vegas gambling expert. He's got Auburn in his top 10. He's got Auburn at 9, ahead of Florida, a team that beat Auburn head-to-head a little earlier in the season. So a lot of the Vegas folks are going to count Auburn amongst the top 10 teams in the country. If we work off Todd Furman's numbers here for a moment, there are only 8 teams on a neutral field to be favored over Auburn, and many of those who might be favored in a neutral field, they're not going to be favored inside Jordan-Hare Stadium. So the talent edge that Georgia enjoys on Saturday is actually, I believe, a pretty substantial storyline for exactly how Georgia's going to get it done. I mean, let's not forget here. This is a Georgia team that, over the course of the last 3 years, number 2 in recruiting for the class of 2019, number 1 in the country for the class of 2018, number 3 in the country for the class of 2017, and Malzahn praised the Georgia defense. A lot of that talent amassed over the course of those recruiting classes is going to be what's on the field for Georgia. And isn't it amazing to think about this? Beyond just the fact that the recruiting edge, the talent edge may be the difference for Georgia in a game that we expect to be razor thin, think about how the emergence of Georgia as a recruiting power has also caused a perception that we have of the Deep South's oldest rivalry to evolve as well. I mean, I was a kid growing up in the 80s, and the one thing that you knew about Georgia-Auburn in the 80s was, oh, man, this is a close rivalry, right? The two teams had the same number of wins. The two, or at least right there at the same number of wins. Not only that, the two programs had almost the same number of total points scored against each other over the course of the history of the rivalry. That's just the way this thing was defined in the 80s. The road teams won a lot. And then you kind of get into the more modern times. All of a sudden, Georgia's starting to pull away in this rivalry a bit, right? All of a sudden, Georgia's starting to build one of those long, I don't want to say streaks necessarily, because Auburn did win this in 2017, but when you look at the ratio of Georgia wins compared to Auburn wins, it's very imbalanced in favor of Georgia right now. And I think one of the reasons we've seen that occur as of late is because of the recruiting success that Georgia's enjoyed. Go look at Auburn's recent recruiting rankings in the 24/7 Sports Composite. It's not quite as high as it used to be. And Georgia's ability to flip a George Pickens and go out and get some defensive guys that maybe at one point in time would have strongly considered going to Auburn, that's a big reason for that. I mean, it wasn't that long ago in Kirby's first recruiting class at Georgia that a head-to-head battle in Sugar Hill, Georgia for Derek Brown, that went the way of the Auburn Tigers. And for a lot of Dog fans, they were lamenting, man, why is it that Auburn's always a recruiting power nipping at the heels of UGA? Why can't Georgia put Auburn in its rearview mirror? Why can't Georgia build a recruiting power that keeps Auburn at bay, especially for in-state defensive linemen? Well, these 3 years later, I mean, how many head-to-head battles have there really been with Georgia and Auburn, and how many of those has Auburn really won? So Malzahn says the Auburn defense, or I should say the Auburn offense, is going up against a Georgia defense that might very well be the most talented in the country. I believe that Malzahn is right when he says that. I don't believe that's empty coach speak. The recruiting work that Georgia has done over the last 3 years is one of the main reasons why it can go into Jordan-Hare Stadium, one of the most hostile venues in all of college football, against an Auburn team that very well might be underrated and have a really good chance to win. I don't know if Malzahn meant it when he said it, but what he said is actually probably true. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. Live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we're available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. And we're brought to you today by our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And, we love our friends there at Pella Window and Door, especially this time of year. It's going to be really cold tonight, and if you're turning on that heat, if you don't have energy-efficient windows and doors, that energy being produced by your heating system is just escaping out of your house, out the door, out the window, everywhere else. So when you install energy-efficient windows and doors from my friends at Pella Window and Door, of Georgia, they're actually going to help you save money in the long run. And the great things about Pella Window and Door, it is a national company, so you get the power and the kind of expertise that comes from that, but they also have a locally owned branch right here in Georgia, which means you get that family-owned brand of service that Pella Window and Door of Georgia is famous for. There are a couple different ways for you to get in touch. You can go online, pellasoutheast.us. That's pellasoutheast.us. Or you can give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom to set up an appointment time, kind of work all that out. 404-445-2979. 404-445-2979. They get great deals for you right now. You can get 0% APR for 48 months, or you can get 50% off qualifying installations, but you got to act now on that. We've only got a couple more days. This expires on November the 14th. So as I speak to you here, you've got just a couple days to get involved on that. So make sure you check them out, pellasoutheast.us, or call them at 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. So later on in our show, we'll talk more to Jeff Sintel about the subject that I began with today, the idea that the talent edge that Georgia's building here and has built over the last 3 years might be one of the reasons that even in a kind of a narrow, thin margin game between Auburn, why Georgia has a reasonable expectation for winning this game. We'll get some more thoughts from Jeff on that coming up in a moment. Before that, let me talk about something different as it relates to Georgia-Auburn on Saturday. And when you hear some Georgia fans who are confident about this game, one of the things that you cite is the fact that Auburn's got a freshman quarterback, and in some spots, in some instances this season, the freshman quarterback for Auburn just hasn't actually played all that well. I'm talking about Bo Nix. You remember him kind of floundering at Florida. You remember him not necessarily keeping pace with the LSU offense in Baton Rouge a couple of weeks ago, and that's the spot on Saturday where a lot of Georgia fans say that's the edge that Georgia needs. Georgia can exploit Bo Nix. Bo Nix can't handle the Georgia defense. This freshman quarterback, who, by the way, is not even all that popular with Auburn fans right now. There were a lot of Auburn fans who were calling for Joey Gatewood before Gatewood made the decision to transfer. A lot of Auburn fans upset with Gus Malzahn that he never pulled the trigger and made a quarterback switch, with Nix kind of struggling the way that he was, to at least give Gatewood or somebody else a chance to move the football with this Auburn offense. Nix has not necessarily been all that popular with Auburn fans. A lot of Georgia fans have noticed that and said that's Auburn's Achilles heel. That is the thing that Georgia can exploit on Saturday. Now, it's worth pointing out that when Kirby Smart spoke with reporters yesterday, when it comes to Bo Nix, he didn't quite seem to see things the same way that the average Georgia fan does. Nix, a huge liability for Auburn. That's what the typical Georgia fan will tell you. Kirby Smart kind of said a little bit different type of thing yesterday. Here is Smart on Nix.
He's playing with a freshman quarterback who I think is going to be a really talented player in this league for a long time. He's been in some really tough games already, and he's played really well. You look across the board, opening with Oregon, who's one of the best teams in the country, to beat those guys and be a true freshman and go out there and do that, it's really hard to do.
So, admittedly, some of what Smart says there sounds a little bit more like the typical coach speak that I was referencing a little earlier in the program, that's the kind of thing that just sort of feels like you have to toss some compliments the way of your opponent, and that's the kind of thing that feels a little bit more like empty rhetoric, if you will. However, I think that Smart, even if he's exaggerating his claim just a bit, I think he's more right than wrong, because my expectation is that Bo Nix, even against a very good Georgia defense, will probably look a little bit more comfortable on Saturday than he has in some of the earlier games this season. I'll give you some of the numbers here. Nix thus far this year is only completing 45.1% of his passes against AP top 25 teams. So when Auburn's played good teams, Nix has really struggled. But as I mentioned before, the two most high-profile instances for Nix in that role kind of come on the road. Playing Florida in the Swamp, no easy feat. Playing LSU in Death Valley, no easy feat. I actually think we're probably overly harsh on Nix, given the fact that he is a freshman and he's had to play in these really tough road venues a couple different times. The truth is, when you look at what he's doing at home, the overall numbers for Nix are a lot better. He's actually completing 60.4% of his passes at home right now, 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Now, those numbers aren't necessarily great, but he is averaging 8.2 yards per attempt, which is not necessarily all that bad. They played an easier schedule at home than on the road, so some of that skews that maybe just just a bit. But this idea that Bo Nix on Saturday is going to be a really easy quarterback to exploit, I think that may be overstating things a bit. First of all, it's getting later in the season. Nix is kind of amassing more experience now, and he's going to be playing in kind of friendly confines, comfortable environment right there at Jordan-Hare Stadium. And to kind of give you one more thing from Kirby Smart, if you thought the first thing that he said about Nix was coach speak, this, I think, is something you're a lot more likely to agree with, that given the fact this is an Auburn offense that kind of can do things multiple ways, they want to run the football, Gus Malzahn always does, and that temptation to want to sneak up and try to stop the run gives a chance for even a limited quarterback like Nix to use some of the valuable offensive weapons that Auburn has at the receiver position. This is an area which I think you do have to be careful with Auburn on Saturday. Here is more of Kirby dissecting the Auburn offense.
Well, it's no more extra important this week than it ever is. I mean, it's important every week, but you can't do it at the cost of giving up explosive plays, and that's the balance you come to with Auburn is, you can sell out to do that, and you got explosive playmakers on the outside. They got some really good wideouts. Seth's a great wideout. They've got Eli, and they've got guys that have been there and played. So you can't sell out to stop the run and expose yourself to the wideouts they've got, and a quarterback that's good playmaker and ability to throw the ball and is playing as good as any freshman I remember playing in this conference, walking in and just playing straight off the street. He's done a good job of that. So these guys have got good players. We can't sell out to stop the run, if that's what you're asking.
So I don't think that Bo Nix is a great quarterback right now, but I do expect him to play better on Saturday, at least more. He threw 3 interceptions against Florida. I don't expect him to just give the game away against UGA this weekend, because I do, when you look at some of those weapons that Auburn has on the outside, especially a guy like Anthony Schwartz, I think there's a lot for the Georgia defense to think about. I think this is going to be a really close game on Saturday. I don't think any aspect of it is going to be easy. Not dealing with Bo Nix or anything like that. I think that Georgia is going to be in a fight all 60 minutes long. And hopefully you do get a chance to get a turnover from Nick at some point in time, but don't necessarily expect him to just give the game away to you because he's in his own stadium and he's kind of a little bit later on the year where he's developed a little bit more experience. I think that Smart's actually probably right about that ultimately the battle with Auburn is going to be a lot more complicated and a lot more difficult to win than that. All right, before we bring on Jeff Sintel, and by the way, we got some breaking news here as far as the live folks on video. Let me also tell you about my friends at Brasstown Valley Resort, because they're coming up on their 25th anniversary, and they're celebrating that in style right now. We're offering you a chance to save 25% off on select dates here this month, the month of November, and heading into December there as well. Beautiful time to get over to Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. Just absolutely, when they start putting the Christmas tree up and they get the fire in the fireplace, everything is just fantastic. And, of course, late fall, beautiful time to see the North Georgia mountains as well. So use the promo code BVR25 at BrasstownValley.com to book your trip today. That's BVR25, BrasstownValley.com. That gives you a chance to save up to 25% on select dates here in the month of November and December. Great to have you with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. All right, we're going to get Jeff Sintel coming up in just a minute. Let me see if I can figure out what's going on here, because as we are live right now, sounds like there's a little bit of news going on out there. Jeff Sintel reaching out to us to say that he's in on something here. So let's see if we can figure that out. If somebody wants to kind of provide me a little bit of help on that, that'd be great there as well. We will kind of see. Looks like we may be in a commit situation. I just need you to tell me what it is. Okay. All right. So if you want to, just write it down and just bring it to me. So it looks like Georgia's gotten a commit. I have no idea who it is, but we'll find out who it is, and then we'll talk to Jeff Sintel about that coming up in just a little bit. We'll also get some of your comments there as well before Jeff is able to join us. Good to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. So let me dive in here. We'll get a few of your comments, and then we will talk to Jeff Sintel here as soon as he's ready to go. So if you wouldn't mind just writing the name of the commit down on a sheet of paper and bringing it to me, and then we'll get Jeff Sintel when he's ready. So let's see what's going on here. Over here on the Facebook side of things, just for a moment. And by the way, happy Tuesday to all of you. Let's go here. All right, so it sounds like Jeff is ready to go. So we'll call him and get him going, and we will see what it is here as part of everything going on here right now. Looks like some folks are Nick Lurch, by the way, kind of agrees with a point that I made a little earlier, is that it's going to be a tight game on Saturday. Yeah, I think so. I think that Georgia-Auburn is going to be quite a tight game, and I think it's going to be quite a challenge there for UGA. And I don't think you can expect Bo Nix just to give it to you. I don't think you can expect him just to give the game away the way they did against Florida. It was much earlier in the season. That was on the road. But as we said before, the overall talent edge that Georgia is enjoying, I think, is I think that's one of the ways in which Georgia can win this thing. So we'll talk a lot more about Georgia-Auburn today and throughout the rest of the week. But it sounds like Jeff Sintel's ready to go, so let's go ahead and get him as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. Good to have you with us.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, we'll say hello to Jeff Sintel. And, of course, live opportunities provide a chance for some breaking news, and it sounds like we got a little bit right now. So by the time much of our radio and podcast audience hears this, they will already know. But, Jeff, since we're live right now on video, sounds like Georgia's gotten to commit. I have no idea who it is. Would you mind telling me who it is?
Hey, Brandon, you want me to say it rhymes with you want me to say the young man comes from Utah? You want me to say
No, listen.
From Canada? You want me to say he comes from Florida?
Don't be pulling anybody's leg right now, Jeff. People are very, very sensitive and very, very antsy for some 2020 recruiting news. Sounds like that's not what this is, though.
No, it's not what it is, Brandon. But let me say this: it is a significant commitment because of the position it comes from. It comes to the running back position. And it comes from the state of Florida and Duval County, of all places,
okay,
my friend. But the one part that will make you that will ground your hopes and anticipations a little bit, though, is it is a 2023 commitment. Now, Brandon, oh my gosh, a freshman running back committed to Georgia after the Missouri game. His name is Trayon Webb. He comes out of Trinity Catholic. That's the stellar program in North Florida, which produced guys like, on and on and on. You remember lots of names that Georgia's been talking about for a lot of times coming out of that area. This was a relationship that he told us that he became a father-son relationship with both Todd Hartley and Dell McGee. Now, mind you, ninth grader, 6 feet, 190 pounds. He's already running a 4.59 in the 40, 35-inch vertical. And again, I'm going to repeat the big things. He committed to play running back for Georgia. He's a high school freshman, and he is the first commitment in the 2023 class when there are 0 commitments in the 2022 class and only 3 commitments in the 2021 class. So for Georgia to take a running back that early means this young man is certainly something special, and he's going to play definitely a marquee position at the University of Georgia.
Yeah, I am curious about this because obviously I have no idea who this player is. So this is all new for me. I do know the Trinity program. That's obviously one of the top programs, certainly in Northeast Florida, if not the entire state of Florida. So I know the program, don't know the player in particular. But when a guy like this gets an opportunity to announce his commitment this far in advance, 2023, as everyone knows, is a long time away. And as you said before, Georgia doesn't currently have a 2022 commit and only kind of just now taking commits for the class of 2021. So it's a bit unusual for Georgia to work this far ahead when it comes to recruiting. I mean, what is the backstory like this? How does Georgia decide, we're going to let you go public with this, and, we're comfortable enough to let you make this announcement? How does something like that go down, and what are all the reasons beyond, this is just apparently a very good player, what are all the reasons why something like that might happen?
Well, I think mainly, we've counseled you guys a lot lately, Brandon, about Georgia's not going to take a young player because there's so much development that will happen. Remember how Kirby Smart kind of uttered that line about a new recruiting philosophy about Georgia. He wants to see more of a prospect senior year. He wants to see them develop more. Georgia in the past has taken a couple of commitments, especially in state, about a year too early when they just thought this is a great player, he's a good fit for us. But now, Brandon, they're not going to take guys that are not going to be able to, that can come in and play right away, especially challenge the too deep on the depth chart. Now, first of all, Brandon, if my mind serves me correctly this morning with a lot of breaking news going on, so you'll have Kendall Milton for the 2020, 2021, and 2022 seasons at least. So Trayon Webb could possibly arrive after Kendall Milton is already playing on Sundays in the NFL. That's how far in light years ahead in the future this is for Trayon Webb. But he's a special player, Brandon. I mean, lots of great players. Ohio State has made a living out of getting the best players coming out of Trinity Christian over the last few years. So especially coming out of their secondary. So for Georgia to pull an athlete out of that program, Trinity Catholic, who's already playing as a ninth grader, that's already 6 feet, 190 pounds, that Todd Hartley, who recruits Duval County, and then Dell McGee have been all over for the longest time, says something, especially at the running back position. And get this, Brandon, he's going to be ending up one of your kind of guys. He already knew he was going to be a Bulldog before he came up and visited for the Missouri game. He just wanted to see the program, see it one more time, be in that stadium before he told the coaches after the game.
So is it sort of fair to say that, given some of the things that Kirby Smart said in the past, wanting to take that senior year to evaluate more guys, and I think you've even kind of written and insinuated that's especially true for the in-state people because, let's just face it, they're more likely to get their feelings hurt if something doesn't quite go right with the evaluation. I'm assuming it's a little easier to take a 2023 commit if it's an out-of-state guy more so than if it's an in-state guy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just think this is a guy, Brandon, I mean, they're not even any ratings about this kid. This is a guy that just really starts playing. I mean, he had film as an eighth grader that looked good. He'd been to Georgia a lot, came to check out the program. But he just felt it, Brandon. He just kind of felt that it was ready. His commitment tweet is elaborate. It looks like he had some help on the edit. And it said, one of the things he said, and we prefaced his commitment tweet, was he said it was already written, and then he went on, going on and on about how he was ready to be a Bulldog, man. I know the type of things when I say a 2023 commitment, when I give that time stamp that Kendall Milton might even be in the NFL by the time Trayon Webb arrives in Athens. I know that's going to be salient with a lot of our readers in a certain way, but, man, this is a great program. Guys like Tyreek Johnson, remember that name from in the past to college football, and they produced some players out of Trinity Catholic in Jacksonville. And Trayon Webb, even though you got to get the long range telescope to figure out what he's going to be and where he's going to be in Athens, still a significant running back commitment because to me it says, number one, Georgia feels good about the future potential of this young man, that they're going to take his commitment and lock him down this early.
Good to know on that. Jeff, I started the show today by talking about the talent edge that Georgia owns over Auburn right now, and a lot of that kind of comes from the classes of 2017, 2018, and 2019, the number 3, number 1, number 2 classes that Georgia's built right there. Gus Malzahn praised that, and I do think it's significant for Georgia in this game on Saturday, in a game that I expect to be close and tightly contested down to the fourth quarter. That extra talent that Georgia has on defense in previous years, guys like that might have played for Auburn. Derek Brown's the perfect example of that from the class of 2016. But the fact those guys are wearing red and black on Saturday, I do think is an edge in the favor of UGA. But even beyond that, isn't it true to say, given the fact that Brown's from Sugar Hill and plays for Auburn, George Pickens is from Hoover and now plays for UGA, that once again, something that has been true for a while, the recruiting backstory here between Georgia and Auburn is one of the big parts of the on-field story there as well. Isn't that true once again?
Well, I'm sure you're not going to mind me sharing this with your audience today, Brandon, but Georgia has currently done a better job signing 5 stars out of the state of Alabama than the Auburn Tigers have. When you can sit there and consider that Auburn comes in and grabs a great defensive lineman by anyone's definition, and Derek Brown. Sometimes a lot of folks would wonder, Georgia's defense is pretty salty, got pretty sharp teeth right now. Can you imagine what it would have been like if Derek Brown would have been a successful recruitment to the University of Georgia? Maybe Derek Brown only needed 3 years in Athens to get to that Sunday league, but you just see these programs, and for forever they battle against the same kids. When anybody wants to sit there and say Georgia loses a home state, homegrown talent like Tank Bigsby out of Callaway High School, I kind of push back on that one a little bit because those players in the area of Columbus and Dougherty County in that area, and even stretching on down to like Sumter and Americus, those players are equally as likely to go to Auburn by distance, by location, by proximity as they are to the University of Georgia. Zacchaeus Walker is another great example. He's a 2020 guy that is taking his official visit to Auburn, and he tells me that it's only 2 hours or hour and a half for him to get to Auburn from Sly County and Ellaville, whereas it's about 3 or 4 hours for him to get to Athens. Really, there's a lot of players on that border that feel a certain type of way about Auburn, even though that their mailing address says the state of Georgia.
It's the Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with Jeff Sintel here. And by the way, speaking of Marlowe's, we're looking forward to being there this upcoming Thursday. Marlowe's matchup, myself, John Stinchcomb, getting ready for Georgia-Auburn, the Deep South's oldest rivalry on Saturday. No doubt we'll squeeze in some recruiting talk there as well and kind of figure out where Georgia fits into this college football playoff chase. We'll do it all this Thursday, starting at 6 p.m. It's at the Brookhaven location. That's 3575 Durden Drive. 3575 Durden Drive, Marlowe's in Brookhaven, 6 p.m. this Thursday. Myself and John Stinchcomb, Marlowe's matchup. We'll do a live broadcast, special Q&A after that. Really just hanging out and having a great time with dog fans, enjoying some of the chef-inspired food and the craft cocktails for which Marlowe's is famous. We'll see at the Marlowe's at Brookhaven this Thursday at 6 p.m. This is going to be one of our biggest events of the year in terms of our Marlowe's shows, and this is going to be a great, great time this upcoming Thursday. To kind of do a little bit more on this sort of Georgia-Auburn recruiting angle here, Jeff, for a moment before we start mentioning some 2020 recruits in particular that I want to talk about. You know, I said the same thing about Georgia-Florida, and I'm going to repeat this about Auburn, that at the SEC level, recruiting is a little bit of a zero-sum game in that when Georgia builds itself up, it doesn't just gain from that. It actually hurts one of its rivals. I don't think there's any coincidence that, you know, Florida has had a hard time signing five-star guys at a time in which Georgia has signed a plethora of them. And you just point out the fact that Georgia's doing better with 5 stars in Alabama than Auburn is. I mean, this is really one of those things when it comes to the elite high-end talent, the top 100 recruits in the country, the 5-star guys, there are obviously not enough of those to go around for all the SEC programs that want them. And in this modern age in which we live in now, these guys have a tendency to congregate together on programs more than they used to. So as Georgia's built itself up from a recruiting standpoint, I think it's pretty obvious that Auburn has really suffered from that. They're still signing plenty of 4-star guys, but for the most part, these are low 4-star guys. These are not necessarily, the kinds of guys that, necessarily, sort of crack that 5-star, top 50 type player status. They're just not doing as much of that as they seemingly used to, and I think because so many of these guys have ended up at Georgia recently, I think that's actually pretty well hurt the Auburn recruiting efforts. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, because, this is what's bad. It sounds good to put on a billboard or a media guide that Auburn for the last 3 years, I think they've been 8, 11, and 12 in recruiting. And, that sounds pretty good, top 10, top 12 program. But when that places you at 5th or 6th in the SEC, well, that's burdensome because all of your rivals are getting better players. Last year, Owen Pappoe, and named Georgia fans, it probably feels like 6 years ago, but there was a time when Owen Pappoe was going to choose Georgia or Clemson, and then Auburn sweeps in a couple of months before he makes his decision, and they become the pick. Bo Nix was another 5-star. That's an Auburn legacy, in the 2019 cycle. And you keep going back, and, Derek Brown was a 5-star. Marlon Davidson, another name that sticks out. They got him out of Greenville, Alabama. And he was another electric defensive end, Brandon. And you sit there and you go, well, where is Auburn really good at? Well, Auburn's really good at a lot of the places where they were able to really hone in on that blue-chip talent. You go back a couple of years, I think memory serves, the year before in 2018, Joey Gatewood was their highest-rated recruit. Yeah. He was a top 50 recruit, and Joey Gatewood's no longer even with the program. You remember names like Matthew Hill out of Brookwood, Smoke Monday out of Carver, Birmingham, That's the guy. And, one matchup that, everybody's kind of hinting on this a little bit, but there's an interesting dynamic there with Anthony Schwartz and Tyson Campbell.
Yeah. First
and foremost, they were high school teammates at American Heritage in Plantation, Florida. Yes, that's Sony Michel's American Heritage, but it was interesting. In his junior year, both of these young men are in the same class in 2018, but in their
I think we may have lost Jeff Sintel. All right, we'll see if we can get him back and let him finish his thought there. He's talking about Anthony Schwartz and Tyson Campbell, two guys that not only from the state of Florida, but competitors in the high school track world down there. Campbell's one of the fastest guys you'll ever find. Anthony Schwartz, though, at least in terms of the Florida high school track competition, was a little bit faster. And Schwartz, in fact, may just be a little bit faster than everyone in college football because of some of the exploits that he put together as a track athlete there in the state of Florida. We'll let Jeff finish that point in just a minute. And of course, if you're just joining us, Georgia's gotten a running back for the class of 2023. I guess that'll be someone that Georgia can use in Norman, Oklahoma that year. You start thinking way into the future with some of this kind of stuff. So that is that. Sounds like Jeff Sintel's back with us, ready to go. Jeff, you were making a point about Anthony Schwartz and Tyson Campbell and their competitions as track athletes going back to their high school days. I'll let you finish that up.
Yeah, so junior year, Anthony Schwartz, the speed demon who has Matthew Bowling-type speed before the Georgia folks on this program even knew who Matthew Bowling was. He was injured. He couldn't compete in his junior year in track. That allowed Tyson Campbell in his 10.4, his very pedestrian, air quotes here, 10.4 speed in the 100 to win the 100 and 200 meters as a junior. So Tyson was the state champion there. Well, next year they were both healthy. This was their spring of their senior years. And Tyson runs a 10.39, which is gloriously ludicrous speed, Spaceballs fast. He finishes second to Anthony Schwartz, who finishes with a 10.09 in the 100. That's the definition of world-class speed. Another thing for all you trivia buffs out there is the 4x100 relay team for American Heritage that year had Campbell, had Schwartz. It also had Alabama starting cornerback Patrick Surtain on that relay team. So I think maybe Connor and I or Brandon could have ran one of those legs in the 4x100 meters, and American Heritage would have been just fine.
Yeah, you never know about that. Hey, let me talk about a couple 2020 guys here for a moment. I think we're about, a week away, maybe a little bit less than a week away now from Theo Johnson's announcement of his college decision. November the 18th, I believe, is his stated date for that. Anything new on this, Jeff? Anything to kind of offer up here? That's probably the next of the 2020 names to make his announcement. Admittedly, I don't feel quite as good about this one as I once would have in terms of Georgia being able to add him to maybe go along with a guy like Darnell Washington that I still feel pretty good about. But anything new to offer on Canada's top prospect?
Brandon, you just want me to tell it all right now, Brandon? Is that what you want me to do?
Sure.
Listen, with Georgia and Theo, the only thing that folks can really maybe anchor down on or really just hunker down on is that Georgia has consistently been a top 2, top 3, top 2 program for him for all this while. I think there's one school amongst that 4 that is clearly out of it. I think there are 3 schools that seem to have been the consensus for him for a long while. And I think the thing here is everybody starts wondering about location, and he has younger brothers from a huge family. I think he has 4 younger brothers. He tried to take a younger brother with him on every one of his official visits to kind of get them exposed to, hey, you can be this someday. This can be you someday. This is what you need to be doing for the family too. There's that. He's the number 1 player in Canada, but there's also, let's just be frank, we're among friends here. Other schools, they feed the ball to the tight end a lot better. Iowa is probably the tight ends what Georgia is to running backs right now in college football. In state, even though they took that one on the chin when someone was rowing the boat and they hit him in the chin with an oar, maybe they took that one on the chin last week to Minnesota. But they continue to get the ball to their tight ends. That's a program which will feature the tight ends. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens on not only on Monday, Brandon, but should it go Georgia's way or should it not go Georgia's way? That puts a huge dollop of grandma's mashed potatoes on Thanksgiving, a huge dollop of emphasis on what happens down the road in 2020 with Darnell Washington. Eric Gilbert is an LSU Tiger. If Theo Johnson ends up an Iowa Hawkeye or Penn State Nittany Lion or a Michigan Wolverine instead of a Georgia Bulldog, this is a must for Georgia to get one of those game-breaking tight ends for this class, not only because they want to change the offense. I want everybody to pay attention to a young man out of Texas A&M, Jalen Weidermeyer. He's a freshman tight end for Texas A&M, and he currently has 6 touchdown catches. Mm-hmm. Now, he only has like 19, 20 catches on the year, but he has 6 touchdown catches on the year because that was the guy Georgia identified a year or 2 ago as you're a guy that can be a red zone weapon, can beat coverage, can shake a safety, can get downfield, make plays in the red zone. And Weidemeyer is the only freshman in the Southeastern Conference right now that has more touchdown catches with 6 than George Pickens right now has with his 4 for the University of Georgia. I think the tight end room has to change. I think it's going to change for Georgia because not only are they losing bodies, they're losing Charlie Warner and Eli Wolf due to eligibility, but they want to try and bring in those red zone threats to give those compacted boxes another option for Georgia to hurt teams and maybe burrow some of those defenders away from the line to have to respect a big playmaking tight end.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Let me do 2 quick things before we let you go. I know we've talked about Zykevious Walker a lot. He's also one of these guys that's kind of knocking on the door of his commitment date, the week of Thanksgiving. And, Jeff, Georgia fans feel good about this one. Obviously, Dog fans like the piece that you had with Zykevious at DawgNation.com recently. We talked about that the last time you were with us. Much like Theo Johnson, who's about to make his choice. Anything new on Walker here? Anything you want to add to some of the things we've said about him as of late?
Well, Walker took his official to Alabama over the weekend, and some of the reports that came out of his camp was that he thought that was, brace yourself, Brandon, one of the best environments or the best atmospheres he's ever been around in college football. Alabama, gave him an official. He got some FaceTime there with Nick Saban, and what's left for Georgia. Georgia has the last official visit with Zykevious Walker for the Texas A&M game. He's going to make his final official visit there. It's really been 4 schools for the longest: Auburn, Alabama, Florida, Georgia. Florida got the official visit for the Auburn game. He saw something there. He's seen Alabama and Auburn in back-to-back weeks. Georgia's the last one, and he plans to make his commitment sometime during Thanksgiving week when he's surrounded by his family, and then he will be done. Zykevious Walker is an early enrollee, defensive end target for the University of Georgia, about 6'4", about 265 pounds, looks like a 3 or 5 technique for the Bulldogs in the future. And one of the biggest remaining priorities and targets for Georgia in the 2020 class. If we want to think back to the interview that showed up on DawgNation last week, he said that Georgia recruits him harder and better than all of the other schools, all the other good programs, great programs out there that are trying to bring him home. And it really sounded like the way Georgia recruits him, especially Scott Fountain and Kirby Smart, even in the mix here as well. It showed him a lot the way Georgia recruited him.
Speaking of that Alabama-LSU game, Jordan Birch was also there as well, right? Do I have that right? Did Birch take a visit for the Alabama-LSU game as well?
He did, sir. He was there.
Anything to add to that, I guess?
Well, can you guess how much media Jordan Birch did outside of the trip for the LSU? LSU.
I'm guessing
LSU, Alabama.
I'm guessing that's about 0, right?
Yeah, that's about 0. I will say this, that he was there and he saw LSU now in 2 impactful moments. He saw them for that win in Death Valley where they beat those Florida Gators, and then he saw them now beat the Alabama Crimson Tide. And it's a great moment for LSU. I don't know if you saw the videos that leaked out on social media, Brandon, about how some of the LSU players walked over to the recruiting bleachers at Alabama.
I did see that.
And were kind of pointing to the recruits saying, I'm sure if you had an SEC country program still popping every day that you would have made notice of that. But I thought that was another layer of how recruiting gets in the SEC sometimes, how LSU players inside Bryant-Denny Stadium were going over to the recruits in the Alabama bleachers and trying to make a certain clear point about where they needed to pick and where they needed to go play their college football for the next 3 or 4 years. During that game in Tuscaloosa.
Let me do one quick thing before we let you go, and you can make this one kind of quick. I saw where Rashad Clayton, a running back we've talked about before, high school teammate of Cedric Von Braun, is going to go play for Colorado in Mel Tucker. And that's another kind of an interesting recruiting win for Tucker, who seems to find a way to kind of get in on some of these guys a little bit. I didn't necessarily expect Johnson to end up at Georgia, but at this point in time, I guess I'm kind of leaning back on something you've said on, I don't remember if it was the Marlowe's Insider Update here on DawgNation Daily or one of our other programs, that maybe at this point in time it's more just the one running back for Georgia for the class of 2020, that Kendall Milton is just going to be it. They'll kind of let it stand with that, and the other scholarships look to take best players available. Is that still kind of the mindset that you're in, that, I've been of the belief for a while that Georgia needs 2 running backs, but if it's not an elite back, then you're probably better off just not, going down that road one way or another. Is that kind of your mindset still when it comes to this?
Well, I think what it certainly is beginning to look like here, Brandon, is you also see the crystal balls now popping up for Zachary Evans and LSU after he saw what they did to Alabama, even featuring a running back for scores in the midst of all that innovative NFL-style Brady Bunch passing. Now it seems like the Zachary Evans train is pointed directly to Baton Rouge. So, with that, I just think there's a confidence there in what Zamir White will bring in year 2 post-knee. James Cook, Kenny McIntosh, Kendall Milton. Those are 4 horsemen that's going to look very good for anybody in the SEC, maybe outside of what LSU has stacked up in the last 2 years at running back. And you're going to have some confidence there in those 4 names. Corey Wren can come in and also maybe get some of those carries that James Cook used to do for the jet sweep type looks. And then Georgia also has a couple of preferred walk-ons to make everybody feel a little bit better about depth with the number 5 and the number 6 running back in the program. And that will just continue the emphasis to where 2021 will be a big recruiting year for Georgia. Brendan, I just think with those scholarships now, Georgia has to do certain things to protect itself at the tight end position and the quarterback position if Jake Fromm goes to the NFL, that I think adding a 5th running back, because it might be the 5th running back that they could potentially add at this point, unless it's a flip of Don Chaney Jr., or even whatever's happening there with Marshawn Lloyd, continuing to see what's happening at South Carolina after the Appalachian State defeat. I think Georgia would have to sit there and say, these are our targets we still want to take. There's definitely elite priority targets in terms of the cornerback, the tight end, the defensive line, the inside linebacker position, even a cornerback like Dante Manning, who just took his official visit to Arizona State last weekend, is expected to be at Oregon this weekend for one of his final 2 official visits. Georgia's going to get the last one there. I just think priorities with the type of best player available are going to get a little skewed about how far things go with the running back position there for Georgia. I think they feel very comfortable about what Kendall Milton can do, along with Kenny McIntosh, James Cook, and Zamir White year 2 after the knees for a junior season in Athens, or redshirt sophomore year in Athens for Zamir White. I think that's the big thing to think about, Brandon, when you're looking at the running back position going forward.
All right, quick reminder, Dog Nation will be live at the Marlows in Brookhaven, 6 p.m. this Thursday for our Marlows matchup. Let me give you the address here one more time. It's 3575 Durden Drive. That's 3575 Durden Drive. Myself, John Stinchcomb, a lot of UGA talk, getting ready for Auburn. A lot of fun. In addition to that, we'll see you there, Marlows in Brookhaven this Thursday at 6 p.m. And, of course, Jeff, we appreciate the insider update you provide as a part of Dog Nation Daily here today, also presented by Marlows Tavern. Appreciate your time. Hope you enjoy the week, and I look forward to getting a chance to talk to you soon.
All right, Brandon. Hey, man. Hope you get more breaking news during the rest of the show. I enjoyed watching that.
All right. Thanks a lot, my friend.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff from Jeff Sintel. Let's cruise around the SEC now. It's brought to you by our friends at Royal Caribbean. And I've been telling you that when it comes to Royal Caribbean, I think one of the things I always enjoy doing is, and they've got great ports all over the country where you can sail on Royal Caribbean ships. But for me, the most convenient to get to is one right there in Port Canaveral in Florida. It's near Orlando. It's an easy drive. And if you've never been on a cruise vacation before, that, I think, is a great way to get there because it's really easy to get to Port Canaveral. Here's the other thing, too. While they have great ships that do week-long sailings, there at Port Canaveral, they have like an amplified ship like Mariner of the Seas, which is completely different and unimaginably different than some of the times that I've sailed on that ship before. It's been amplified now. It offers 3 and 4 day sailings going out of Port Canaveral. So if you want to take that first cruise vacation, those 3 and 4 day sailings are a great way to, no pun intended, sort of dip your toe into the water there a bit. You can provide they'll provide that opportunity for you. And the great thing is, on some of those 3 and 4 day sailings, like the Mariner of the Seas going out of Port Canaveral, you get a chance to experience Perfect Day Coco Cay, the private destination right there in the Bahamas with the thrill side, the chill side, where you can literally relax and enjoy the lap of luxury while you do so, or have a bunch of fun with your family or whoever you're going on the vacation with. It's a great experience. Check out this website, RoyalCaribbean.com. That'll get you in touch with a travel advisor near you, and you can be on your way for a wonderful cruise vacation. Our friends at Royal Caribbean, RoyalCaribbean.com. Let me do a couple stories around the SEC that I didn't have time to hit yesterday. Chad Morris is out. He's been fired from Arkansas. disaster, and it's easy to understand why he's no longer going to be the head coach there. Now the question becomes, okay, what happens next? You're seeing a lot of national media types say, well, you've got to swing for the fences here. You've got to go out and bring in a guy like Mike Leach. For me, swinging for the fences is probably a pretty good decision for Arkansas. It's really amazing how depressed the fan support has gotten there in Fayetteville. They've had 2 long losing streaks with 2 different coaches over the last few years, so the Arkansas fan is about fed up, and they need a bigger, more dynamic personality than what Chad Morris was. But I believe that Mike Leach would be doomed to fail in the SEC. I just think that quirky personality works in the kind of crunchy granola world of the Pacific Northwest. But you come down here and you start talking about zombie apocalypses or pirates or whatever else, that's not what SEC fans want. They're just more serious about their football than that. Leach works in remote outposts. Lubbock, Texas, Pullman, Washington. But even in Fayetteville, Arkansas, you got a lot of people who are hardcore and plugged into football. They want a guy that's serious about winning, and I don't think that Leach would come across as serious enough for them. My example of swinging for the fences for Arkansas would be more along the lines of a guy like Hugh Freeze. Freeze is a great coach. I mean, you can say what you want about his personal life, and maybe he's kind of figured all that kind of stuff out and fixed some of that kind of stuff. Maybe he hasn't. We don't know. But we do know this. He's doing some pretty good things with the Liberty offense. As coach at Ole Miss, the recruiting stuff aside, he beat Alabama on the field twice. So no matter how he was getting access to those players, he was using them to get big wins. I think that Freeze would be the perfect coach for Arkansas. Now, you may have to hold your nose to make the hire, but if you want to win, there's no one more likely to win at Arkansas than what Hugh Freeze would be. By the way, speaking of a coach who's apparently not going to lose his job, that's Will Muschamp. Reports kind of coming out of Columbia that for now, Muschamp might be safe. 2020 being a year where he needs to win, show some improvement, probably so, but for now, probably safe. I think this is the right decision. I think he has to deal with a situation where his closest SEC rival, Georgia, and his in-state rival, Clemson, are kind of on unprecedented runs of success, both on the field and in recruiting, and that just doesn't leave a lot for South Carolina. It's kind of like that old – you ever seen the movie There Will Be Blood, where Daniel Day-Lewis, the main character, the role that he's playing talks about it's an oil movie about taking oil out of the ground. He says, I'll drink your milkshake, and – that's kind of what's going on here. Now, that's kind of a convoluted analogy and a long way to go to get to this. But Clemson, Georgia are just drinking South Carolina's milkshake. I mean, they've completely absorbed everything around the program. There's not a lot of footing left for South Carolina to stand on right now. So I actually kind of feel a little bit sorry for a guy like that trying to build up a program. Obviously, they got the head-to-head win against Georgia, but they really have nothing to match that with really at all right now. A couple more stories here real quick. Watching Tennessee win another game on Saturday gets me thinking about this. Do you remember how dire the situation for Ed Orgeron used to be at LSU? He lost a game to Troy. Isn't that pretty similar to Tennessee's loss to Georgia State? There was total turmoil. Remember, the university president and athletic director came and sat in on coaching meetings because Orgeron was just not getting along with his offensive coordinator, Matt Canada. LSU was as big a mess as it could be. But now you almost completely forget about that. Look at the situation at Tennessee right now. As I said before, starting to win some games on the heels of a really ugly loss to Georgia State. This looks like a program on much firmer footing now than it did at the beginning of the season. I think this is still a long shot, but in terms of a guy in Orgeron who used to be mocked, who now looks like among the class of the SEC coaches, is there a chance that Jeremy Pruitt could follow the same path? Weathering some early turmoil to put himself on better footing in the years to come. I think this 2020 recruiting cycle for Pruitt's going to be very interesting to watch. They've missed out on some guys they probably should have gotten, but can they use some sudden on-field momentum to win with more recruits? I've said before, I think Pruitt's chance of building up Tennessee into something that's a formidable threat to Georgia is actually greater than Dan Mullen's chances of doing that at Florida. There's a huge gap between Tennessee and Florida right now, but the rest of the season and during the offseason, I'll be watching closely to see if Jeremy Pruitt can do something to close that gap. By the way, college football playoff top 25 announcement comes out later on tonight. We'll see if Georgia moves up there in that regard. And for now, we'll make that the SEC through as we cruise around the SEC, courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. And I want to make an interesting comparison between Georgia and a previous national champion in a moment. Before that, though, let me tell you a quick story. Did you know that 90% of plastic worldwide's never been recycled? That was discovered recently by an environmental waste research at the University of Georgia. Now, the work they did ended up winning an award. I love this. That was the 2018 International Statistic of the Year. Now, I toss around a bunch of statistics on this program a lot, but I don't believe I've ever won International Statistic of the Year by the Royal Statistical Society, but these UGA researchers did. It's just an example of a lot of the great work that goes on at UGA every single day. And for those of you who are proud graduates of the University of Georgia, your support of the UGA Alumni Association enables this kind of work to go on and other great things being done. UGA grads actually impacting the world and making it a better place. But to make UGA as impactful as it can be, obviously they need your support. So here's a website that you can go to find out more about that. give.uga.edu. That's give.uga.edu. And you can support the UGA Alumni Association. So I wrote a piece at DawgNation.com yesterday, and the reason why I wrote it is because I tried on yesterday's show to say that I believe overall the Georgia offense might be a little closer to being competitive than some people think it is. And I say that knowing full well that I've contributed to the narrative of what this offense isn't as much as maybe anybody around DawgNation has. I'm full aware of all of that. But when you start looking at the research, teams that have won national championships recently, what you realize is that Georgia, led by a great defense and kind of dragging along a sometimes sputtering offense, that's not quite as much of an outlier as you might think. In fact, if you go over to DawgNation.com, read the piece that I wrote, Georgia's profile is eerily similar to Kirby Smart's last team in Alabama, the one in 2015 that won the title. Great defense, among the best in the country. Georgia very much the same way right now. Offensively, also pretty similar. Georgia, if you care about advanced stats, currently 22nd in FEI from Football Outsiders. That Alabama team was 24th. If you care about the more traditional stats of total offense, Georgia was 32nd, is 32nd right now. Alabama was 45th back in 2015. And that offense was enough for Bama to get by because it had a great defense. And I think the same thing can be true for Georgia this year. Now, as I also pointed out in my piece, Alabama did play better down the stretch. They started scoring about 37 points a game in the final regular season games into the college football playoff, including an SEC championship game. So the Georgia offense does need to get better, but I think the idea of how much better it needs to get has probably been exaggerated. When you have a defense as great as Georgia's is, and right now, statistically speaking, it's among the best in the country, a good offense alone is going to be enough, and Georgia probably has to make some improvement to get up to that level of actually being truly good enough maybe. But it could certainly be done. I thought it was very telling, and I briefly mentioned this on DawgNation Daily yesterday, and I'll mention this again right now. Obviously wrote more about this. 3 of the last 4 national champions in the college football playoff era were either first or second in the country when it comes to points allowed for a season. Not a single national champion in the college football playoff era, with the exception of last year's Clemson, was in the top 10 in scoring. So scoring defense has seemingly correlated with winning a national championship a lot more than scoring offenses. So if you're a Georgia fan, maybe something to feel pretty good about. By the way, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door, let's also give you one more thing to feel pretty good about here. The performance of a few of the top dogs around the NFL. It's brought to you by our friends at Kroger, and let's celebrate a few of these names right here. How about Nick Chubb on Sunday going for 116 yards on 20 carries in a 19-16 win over the Bills? McCole Hardman, you may have seen the highlight of this. I mean, that's as fast as I've seen a human being run on a 63-yard touchdown there for his Kansas City Chiefs. Pretty good game against the Chiefs and the Titans. Roquan Smith, he's been hot lately. 11 tackles for him again in a 2013 win against Detroit. Matthew Stafford did not play in that game, by the way. Jordan Jenkins had 2 sacks for the Jets in a 34-27 win against the Giants. And Thomas Davis, and this is amazing, Davis played on Mark Richt's first teams at Georgia, and he's still playing in the NFL right now. 11 tackles for him for the Chargers in a 26-24 loss to the Oakland Raiders, who are about to be the Las Vegas Raiders. But more impressive performances from Thomas Davis. Boy, that is really great to see. Top dogs in the NFL, presented by Kroger. And by the way, speaking of Kroger here for a moment, make sure you plan all your upcoming parties. You got big things going on for the holiday season. Well, party platters from Kroger, a great way to do that. You can get shrimp platters, veggie trays, meat and cheese trays, and they start at just $19.99 right now. So you can order online or over the phone, or you can just stop by your local Kroger deli and talk to them about that. Kroger can help you plan your party so you can enjoy and not have to spend the entire time working. I'll also say this. There is Georgia basketball tonight. The Dogs host the Citadel, so another chance to see the Ant-Man, Anthony Edwards. I thought last week's game for Georgia in the season opener was actually really entertaining, so I'm looking forward to watching this team play a little bit more tonight and looking forward to seeing if they can put a nice run here together, maybe challenge for the NCAA tournament come the end of March. That should be fun to watch. Something else that's fun to watch is the way the Gator Hater Updater climbs every single day. We love that, and we look over today and see it stands now at 1,109 days. Pretty impressive stuff. We'll watch it keep going. Thanks for being here. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. We'll take all your comments. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. R.S. Andrews does all that kind of stuff. But tonight, the thing they could do for you is make sure that heating system's ready to work. Do you know it's going to get down to 25 degrees tonight? That means if you haven't turned your heat on yet, you will be turning it on tonight. You want to make sure it's safe to make its way through the cold weather winter to come. So the best way to make sure you do that is by getting the R.S. Andrews Mega Safety Check. It's just $99. They'll get your system back to factory fresh specs. So check them out online at rsandrews.com. Ro Hawkins giving us an and on video. Bill Granger giving us an 1109. You love to see it. Oh, how about this from Miriam Martin Corbin, that Thursday is going to be 1,111 days. So pretty nice stuff there on that. Frank Hilton talking about the fact that, Matthew Stafford had some bones broken in his back. Pretty tough situation for him after he's been really putting up some big stats as of late. Justin Glaze says, glad to see Eddie the Wise back on the show. Yeah, Eddie's back here right now. And by the way, on your screen, you see Trayon Webb, the 2023 running back, we'll call him, athlete, maybe listed by the recruiting services. Some of the work that he's doing as a freshman. In Florida, something you can't do in Georgia, at least I don't think you can do at any level in Georgia, you can play varsity as an 8th grader in Florida. I don't believe you can play varsity as an 8th grader in Georgia, but maybe Webb's got a little bit more high school experience than you might think because of that. So Trinity's a really good program, and so Georgia reaches deep into the future to pull out a recruit and a commit here today. Clarence Dawson says, BA, how do you feel about the Auburn game? I feel like it's going to be very, very close. As a fan, I'm very, very nervous. I think it's razor thin, down to the wire. I think, as I said during the show today, that if you're counting on Bo Nix just handing the game on a silver platter, I don't think you can count on that. But I do think that Georgia's talent edge, the fact that it's out-recruited Auburn over the last 3 years at least, I think that's really important here, and I think that Georgia's in a good spot. I think that this is about as much as you can hope for, right? There are a couple teams who maybe feel like they've already got their playoff bid sewn up. LSU may feel that way. Even if they lost the SEC championship game, they may feel that way. But for the most part, that's not what the average team in college football gets. For the most part, the average college football team can only hope to be where Georgia is, on the road, trying to win a big game. And if you do, you get a chance to play for another big game. For Georgia, the playoffs actually kind of have already begun. And so I think it's a tough game for Georgia to win. I think it's going to be a very, very difficult contest all the way around. But I got no complaints. This is what you do, right? You go on the road, you play tough games, you play rivals. Crowd's going to be loud. They're going to be breathing down Georgia's neck, and this is what college football is all about. So while I am nervous about the outcome, I'm thrilled to be a part of the storyline right now, thrilled to be in it. You got to be in it to be winning right now. Georgia is. Don Williams says nervous too. Let me get the rest of this from Don. But I feel that it'll be a close team. Our defense will carry us, and that's what you're leaning on right now. Enough offense, and obviously a continued dominant performance from the defense. As I said before, based on a lot of the comments yesterday, people just weren't buying when I was selling on the Georgia offense having a chance to still be a part of a national championship equation. Much the same way, fairly, at least in terms of the National League comparison, fairly pedestrian Alabama offense worked out in 2015. Some people are still pretty skeptical about that. I have been skeptical. I'm not quite as skeptical as I once was, though. So Tommy Hinton says, I think we got to take it 1 week at a time. I think we overlook South Carolina knowing that Florida was coming up. Yeah, lack of full attention on South Carolina. There's at least a possibility that's true. I think what you really see more than anything, though, is instead of, Georgia was looking past this opponent to look ahead to a future opponent, I think more than anything, it's just hard to be consistent from week to week. It's hard to have the same level of focus week to week. Gosh knows Kirby Smart tries to do that with the whole, treating every opponent the same and every day the same. That's where the whole attack the day mantra came from, that you don't get up more for 1 week than you do for another. You just try to approach every day somewhat consistently, and I get all of that. But it's really hard to do. I mean, think about this in your own walk of life. Some days at work are just better than others, right? I mean, some days your hair looks good, your suit fits just right, you're kind of, on the ball, you get the best answers to give in your meetings, and some days it's just kind of hard to find that same level of energy. I mean, I think we kind of all deal with that, and I don't think football's that different there in that regard. And so when you see a bad performance from a team, and for the most part, just about every team, no matter how bad it is, will play a great game at some point in the season. They may not win because they're not talented enough, but in terms of top-level performance, at some point in time, almost every team will provide its top-level performance. And every other team, no matter how good it is, will almost invariably have a really bad performance at some point in time where the bottom just kind of falls out based on the expectations. So that's kind of Georgia's deal. Luckily, though, when you are playing a schedule as difficult as Georgia's is in the SEC championship to come, that you actually can weather a loss okay. I mean, ultimately, the South Carolina loss won't be what keeps Georgia out of the playoff because, I think ultimately it's what Georgia does the rest of the way that probably really matters. Wally Foster says, I'm nervous about this game, but I think the defense will keep us in there, and Jake's going to make the right decisions when it matters most. Yeah, I mean, we saw Fromm the other day outplay a quarterback that he's supposed to outplay, right? I mean, Kyle Trask had a pretty good season for Florida, but Jake Fromm is supposed to be one of the top players in the country. Fromm had heard some rumblings and some complaints, and went out there and he kind of, basically fired back at his critics with his play on the field and outplayed Kyle Trask. This is another opportunity on Saturday where junior Jake Fromm, potential NFL quarterback Jake Fromm, against a freshman for Auburn that's really scuffled. Fromm's going to be the clear better quarterback on Saturday. And in a tough road environment, that's not necessarily easy to do, but I think that with good reason, Georgia fans trust Fromm to get that done. This offense hasn't been perfect, but they can be good enough, and on the road, Fromm outplaying Nix, I think, is a reasonable expectation. Clay Dyke says Pickens going to show out for Auburn. Boy, that'd be something to see. No doubt. I know Connor asked Kirby about this yesterday. No doubt there'll be a lot of emotion for him there because the Auburn people, listen, everybody knows that Pickens plays a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, right? And I think that's great. I love the edge. That's a nasty guy. Listen, you get in some trouble, if you get into some trouble in life, you got to have some people who are going to, be ready to go at your defense. Pickens is a guy that, you want him in that foxhole with you, right? I mean, he's just ready to go, right? He's got a lot of energy, and right now it's being channeled in a great direction. And I think that Auburn, much like I'm sure a lot of teams have, you try to poke him and prod him and kind of, get him off his game, get that energy and emotion moving in the wrong direction. That's just a natural tendency, I think, for any opponent here. But I think that Pickens can really use that to his advantage on Saturday. I do. Let's get some YouTube comments, and then we'll get back over to the Facebook here in just a moment. What else is going on? Elite GB says this game's going to be won or lost in the trenches. I think that's true. I thought Kirby had some interesting things to say about that, and it was really a good line of questioning from some of the reporters yesterday about blocking the Auburn defensive line. And, you talk about Florida, which we think of Grenard and Zuniga, those two guys on the outside, difficult to block. For Auburn, it's more about blocking those guys on the inside. But it's a real challenge on Saturday. It is, especially just given the fact that Georgia played three centers on this past Saturday against Missouri. That's a real challenge. It's the kind of thing that you expect, Georgia to be up for that challenge, but it's not easy. It's not easy at all. This is one of the better teams in the country. As I said before, Vegas, I would have them in the top 10. And, the fact that Georgia is considered a point spread favorite in Jordan-Hare Stadium, I think is actually a pretty nice coup for the Dogs. Crow King 123 says Georgia starts early, starts strong, scores, get ahead, will win this game comfortably. So honesty compels me to admit that's exactly what happened in 2017, and Auburn completely flipped the script after that. Now, I'm not trying to be negative, but Georgia on that first drive against Auburn in 2017 marched down the field and put it in the end zone, and you felt like that's exactly what Georgia was heading for, and that just didn't happen after that. GB2 says, how do you compare the Auburn defense to the Missouri defense? Just wondering why our offense is so inconsistent. So I believe the Auburn defense is way better than the Missouri defense. Missouri, statistically speaking, has been pretty good, but a lot of that's on the basis of not exactly playing some high-powered offenses. Auburn's defense statistically is what it is after, having been to LSU, having been to Florida, which, you can debate for yourself how intense that is. Auburn's played the more difficult schedule. They played Oregon out of conference. And the fact that we have this thought of the Auburn defense after the schedule that it's played, I think that says a whole lot more, for them than it does for Missouri. The Missouri defense is good. The Auburn defense may be great. And so it's a real challenge for a Georgia offense that's scuffled a bit. But as I said before, you can hear me and we can all decide, either I'm really, really wrong on Monday and you can laugh at me and blame me if you want, or you can say, well, maybe we're a little bit too quick to judge. I am more than content and more than happy with the issues of the Georgia offense, as at times maddening as it has been. I am more than happy just to let it play out. And let's see, can they find an extra level of performance? Can they do, like the comparison that I made at DawgNation.com yesterday and on the show a little earlier? Alabama, after the Tennessee game, they won that game 19-14 in 2015. Then after that, they go on a run of scoring 37 points per game for the rest of the season. That's Mississippi State, back when Mississippi State was a tough team. That's LSU. That's Auburn. That's Florida in the SEC Championship. That's 2 college football playoff games, including Clemson, the national championship game, a game in which they scored 45 points. They just found another gear offensively. And because Alabama did it doesn't mean that Georgia will do it. But the fact that a team that statistically was very similar to Georgia, the fact they went on a run when it mattered, means the door is at least open to Georgia to do some of that same kind of stuff. Georgia's never going to be quite as pretty offensively as what LSU is right now. That's not available to Georgia. That's not an open option right now. But being a little bit better than they have been, somehow finding some sort of schematic way to do this, it's at least a possibility, right? Brian Whitehead says, didn't see any play action on Saturday. That seemed to be the key against Florida. Yeah, Brian, I'm kind of right there with you. I don't know the numbers on this of how many times Georgia did do the play action versus Florida compared to how many times they didn't do it versus Missouri. I don't know the overall numbers, but to my eyes, it certainly seemed less there in that regard. And I think what that kind of comes down to is I think that Georgia just had a lot more time to throw against Florida. I think they were more comfortable in a play-action pass situation, allowing Fromm to turn his back to the defense, because I think that Georgia, just against Florida, knew it was going to have time to throw. Great pass protection. Pass protection probably wasn't quite as rock solid against Missouri on Saturday. Crow King 123 says having A&M at home is comforting. Yeah, it's comforting. That's still no easy game, though. Still no easy game. But, yeah, certainly better to have them in Athens as opposed to having to go to College Station late in the year. Thomas Van Santa, though, feeling pretty good, saying we're going to beat them down. We will see. Giddy89 says we're designed to stop A&M. I probably agree with Giddy on that for the most part. A little bit better matchup overall than what Auburn is on Saturday. Douglas Buchanan says that UGA has a better defense than Auburn. They have only given up 3 points in the third quarter all year. Pretty impressive, and I think that there's a chance that's probably true. Unfortunately, though, the Georgia defense doesn't play the Auburn defense. The Georgia defense plays the Auburn offense, and I know you know that. I'm just saying that, while the Auburn offense hasn't been great, as Kirby said, and we heard the clip on the show today, it still presents some challenges. It's still, you can't completely sell out to stop the run because Eli Stove and Anthony Schwartz and those guys bring kind of that speedy dynamism to the table. So that is that. Cliff Payne says clinching the East, beating Auburn at Jordan-Hare would be sweet. It really would be. Kind of reminds you almost the old sugar falling out of the sky days back in 1982. At least it reminds me of that. Anikmi Adobo, I hope I pronounced that name correctly, Yodobo, I should say, says don't sleep on Texas A&M, and I think that's good advice. I do. Clarence Walker says A&M scares me more than Auburn. A&M scares me more as a Georgia fan than a lot of the teams that Georgia's played this season, maybe even as much as Florida, just given the way that I thought that Georgia matched up with Florida. But the Auburn game for me is still tougher. I have a lot of respect for being in that stadium. That stadium was a house of horrors for UGA in 2017, and I know there was some complaints from some Auburn players after the Ole Miss game 2 Saturdays ago. But the environment not being stellar, I don't think that's going to be a problem on Saturday. Probably the biggest home game that Auburn's played this year. Clarence Walker says Georgia's got more grit than Auburn. That's a great way to describe it. Hope that ends up being true. Let's see what else is going on. Tyler Walker says if Georgia beats Florida by a field goal next season, is Mullen then going to say that Florida's only 3 points behind Mullen? Yeah, that was definitely his narrative the other day, which I thought was ridiculous at the time, and I think it's still ridiculous now. It's a pretty funny comment. Chris Branham not agreeing with the idea that A&M's as tough as Auburn, which I would probably agree with Chris on that. Scott Gentry says that we played vanilla again against Missouri. No, we don't have to show it all. Looking for us to turn up this week. Yeah, I mean, I think the offense has a tendency to look a little more, to use your word, vanilla when Lawrence Cager's not playing. Somehow Cager is just a nice spice that seems to impact everybody beyond just himself. Robert Barnes says the Auburn game is the biggest game of the year for us. Certainly from a regular season standpoint, I've always felt that way. Matt Rugavina says it's Auburn week. That means Red October reference time. Gustav and his crazy Ivans might have been them an early lead, but Kirby, a pretty good Red October, Hunt for Red October reference there from Matt Rugavina. Pretty good stuff. By the way, somebody also, that loseby7.com thing, had kind of redirected that website. They bought that URL, redirected the website to the Florida official football page after Malzahn's comment about only being 7 points behind Georgia, which is pretty funny. Whoever did that, it's actually a pretty good job. Casey Cochran says, are we invading Jordan-Hare? We'll be there. Man, it was loud in 2017. Yeah, I don't know how much DawgNation invasion type stuff you're going to hear this weekend, just because I think it's hard to get those tickets, but I have heard from a lot of Georgia fans who plan on being there, and for those of you that are, you got to do your part, man. It's gonna be important. It's gonna be important. Going to be important to have as many UGA people in the stadium as possible. Our buddy Santiago Diarn checked in saying, I'm nervous about the outcome of the game, but I truly believe Kirby will have the players ready because we are playing for the SEC East title and we'll win it out on the field. Yeah, I do respect Kirby as a motivator in games like this. I think he understands how not to turn it on too much and how to turn it on enough at the exact right time. I'm obviously speculating on this, but just based on some of the things we've seen from time to time, he seems to get that part of it. I think some coaches get guys a little too hype. I think some coaches maybe don't get them quite hype enough. And some coaches get the right level of hype, but they may get it too early in the week. Kirby seems to be pretty good at the opposite on that. And so I think that does work to his advantage. Chris Branham says, who leads UGA in receiving on Saturday? That's a really good question. It comes down to, do you believe Kirby last 2 days? We'll do more of this on Thursday. Last 2 days, actually sort of speaking pretty optimistic about Lawrence Cager. You believe Kirby when he says that. Obviously, there's a value in him saying that Cager is healthy because he wants to draw, top Auburn cornerback over in kind of a man coverage situation on Cager, providing an opportunity for a guy like George Pickens when he's on the field with Cager, or someone else when they're on the field with Cager, to take advantage of lesser coverage. So Kirby's got a motivation to say Cager is healthy, even if he's not. So I guess it comes down to, do you believe Kirby on that? And I guess on Trey Hill for a certain extent. GB2 says, what would the message be to the nation if we shut out Auburn on Saturday? I think it's a really good question. Now, I'm a little late to the party on this because for a long time, I was of the belief that you couldn't truly be led to a national championship by your defense. I've said that a million times. But as we kind of get a little closer, I'm a little bit more inclined to believe that. I think that a shutout of Auburn will be less exciting to the national media than an LSU 50-point explosion. That's just human nature. It's just the way life is, that you're just automatically more drawn to a big offensive performance than a dominant defensive performance. That's just the way that life works. But it's telling to me that, we've only had one college football playoff national champion that finished in the top 10 in scoring offense. But 3 of the last 4 have been either first or second in points allowed. That's not a huge sample size necessarily, but it shows a pretty strong correlation between not giving up any points and winning, maybe more so than scoring points and winning does. So I'm not quite sure what the national media would say about that, but I know what the local dog fans, folks within inside the bubble of Dog Nation, would be thinking and saying about that. And they'd be thinking and saying that this Georgia defense may absolutely be the true catalyst to a championship for the Dogs. Elvis Presley checking in on YouTube. Good to have the King with us, saying, where's the tailgate with the game? So no Dog Nation tailgate this weekend, but I'm sure there'll be lots of Georgia fans looking forward to welcoming some other Dog fans there on the plains on Saturday. Stuart Nix brings up a really good point. He says, I said it once and I'll say it again. We've got to convert red zone field goals into touchdowns. We let our opponents stay in the game. We don't convert those points. And yeah, that's one thing about Georgia that I think that is a very simple fix to change, right? That even with the overall level of yards that Georgia's producing right now, that can be enough if you find a way just to get a few more points. And your point about in the red zone, field goals, turn them into touchdowns, which means you got to make accurate passes, right? I mean, ultimately, that's what really the difference is. It's hard to run in the red zone because safeties don't have to worry about the ball being thrown over their head. They get to creep closer and closer to the line of scrimmage, which means you're having to throw the ball more down deep. That was Georgia's problem last year. Georgia was really bad at goal line offense because Georgia just didn't throw it enough on goal line situations a year ago. You got to keep defenses guessing. And short field, really tight windows, 11 defenders bunched together, that means really, really accurate throws. Now, the good thing is that Fromm's an accurate passer, but the challenge in a red zone situation is you have to have a more accurate throw than normal. And the Eli Wolf opportunity on Saturday is a perfect example of that. Great play design, kind of a power jumbo set that Georgia throws it out of. Probably caught Missouri napping on that a bit, but not quite a perfect throw. And in those instances down close, you need something close to a perfect throw to convert on a touchdown situation like that. Georgia ended up selling for a field goal. But I think Stewart's overall point's very, very true. Very true. Let me do a couple more on Facebook, then we got to go. Matthew McGahee says if you turn just one field goal into a touchdown, it's a big deal. Get two and you blow people out. That's really true. That's really true. It's not, Fromm's thing on Saturday night after the game about inches, just a few inches away. It is true. You turn one incompletion into a completion, that's like 4 more points. 4 more points in the right game feels very different, and not just in terms of the style points against a team like Missouri, but against a team like Auburn or a team like Texas A&M. It could be the difference between winning or losing the game. I think that's a really good point. Daniel Mapp on the subject of Zamir White. Yeah, it certainly seems like, at least for now, White's kind of settled into a supporting role, and that doesn't change the overall outlook for me for the rest of his career. I think that White's going to be among Georgia's leading rushers next season. But this team belongs to DeAndre Swift right now, and I guess Brian Herrien second after that. Justin Glaze says, is this the only year we have 2 byes, or will this continue in the future? So the reason why there are 2 byes this year is because Labor Day, which is when the college football season begins, or the weekend of Labor Day, is the earliest that it possibly could be. And this year, Thanksgiving, which is the traditional end of the regular season, is the latest it possibly could be. So when you have that weird scheduling anomaly of an early Labor Day and a late Thanksgiving, it puts an extra week on the calendar, and that's when there are 2 byes this week. So next year, you kind of cycle back to kind of more of a traditional schedule in terms of when Labor Day is, when Thanksgiving is, and it'll be back to just the 1 bye week next year. So it was a scheduling anomaly for everyone across the country because of the way that the calendar fell that led to the 2nd bye week. All right, y'all, I've got to go. I apologize for that. Make sure you check out AJC.com, though, to get your Atlanta news now. Former President Jimmy Carter dealing with a little bit of a health issue right now. There is an update on that at AJC.com as well. He's at Emory Hospital right now, so you can check up on that. Also, there was a really interesting story in the AJC about the professional teams in Atlanta and the state of Georgia kind of banding together, pushing for legalized sports gambling. I feel like I probably know what's going on here, but it's probably not my place to pontificate on that. But if you care about gambling at all, the professional teams apparently lobbying on behalf of those who want legalized sports gaming in Georgia to go along with Tennessee and some of the other states, that North Carolina around the South who've chosen to do the same thing, Mississippi. So the professional teams in Georgia pushing for that. Do they want a share of that revenue in the form of an integrity fee or whatever you want to call it? That'll probably be a story worth watching. You can read that, though, at AJC.com for a whole lot more on that. Also, some train adventures near Atlanta for the holidays. That's fun stuff, too. You can read about that at AJC.com as well. All right, so huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. We really trust them to do all that for us here. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. It's our friends at R.S. Andrews, story after story. They've been delivering smiles, and so they can deliver a smile for you as well. But you've got to check them out online at rsandrews.com. And thanks for being here with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. We'll see you again tomorrow.